Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Seid, co-founder and general partner of Ballistic Ventures. We're an early stage cybersecurity focused venture firm. Very happy to have Francis Odum with us. He's the founder and leads the software analyst and is an incredibly thoughtful researcher on areas that are near and dear to our heart in cybersecurity, including identity, SOC, data security. Before that, extensive background in the product management space. And so excited to have him on with us to talk about identity. And there's so much changing in identity. Francis, great to have you.
Thank you so much again for having me. Big fan of the firm, big fan of yourself, Jake, as well, and all that you've done with Ballistic.
And generally, we think of identity today falling into three buckets: IGA, the governance bucket; IAM, the runtime bucket; and PAM, this area of privileged access management. How do you think about, given where we are in the state of architecture, the challenges that have arisen with these traditional buckets?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like the list could be endless in terms of the types of challenges, but I do like the fact that you break them down into those major categories. If we maybe start from like authentication or like your traditional IAM type solutions, I think we still have challenges today in terms of how organizations. I mean, many companies still don't use MFAs or they have really broken processes whereby attackers are still able to bypass a number of these authentication controls or IAM controls that companies have. I think we still have a lot of loopholes on that hand, and that's why these days you hear about attackers. I think the word now is like attackers don't break in, they log in because of whether it's a stolen credential, whether it's through credential stuffing, or through the open web as well. And so you have a situation whereby there's just a lot of problems in your traditional IAM, and attackers are just able to log in and get access to systems. So I think that usually how I like to first of all think about the challenge. It starts from the authentication IAM side, and then as you move further right, you start to talk about the governance side of things and some of the other challenges once you're past the infrastructure itself. And now we're dealing with questions around, okay, now you're logged in. What do you have access to? What types of resources? What are the applications? And like, what kinds of governance controls do we have around this? And I think we still have challenges in terms of just the complexities of many legacy vendors were built for an on-prem era in terms of how you manage identities. But we know with cloud AI, the numbers of identities has vastly increased. The number of resources that companies have to use and manage different identities for has grown. And so you have challenges with your legacy governance type, IGA type vendors in terms of adapting to this new world with NHIs and cloud native environments. And lastly, too, I think, yes, a similar conversation could be said in terms of just really manual processes, whether it's in terms of managing your privileged users, leading to a lot of inefficiencies and errors in provisioning. Yeah, the customer experiences are still broken. And yes, the problems doesn't seem to be solved. We still hear the news every day of new types of attacks. So those are just in a summary, but we could go on and on other areas.
That's a good kind of overview of these challenges, right? As we move to cloud and SaaS, how that's really kind of broken identity. What do you view a next gen solution looking like? And in a next gen solution, do you get a defining platform? Like CNAP has kind of become this defining platform in cloud, and SASE is kind of this defining platform around the network. Do you wind up, is a next gen solution a kind of a defining platform? Do you still wind up with these multiple different buckets? How do you see it evolving given those challenges?
I had this identity ecosystem map that I shared with the cyber community. This was just right around Christmas. And yeah, I had what over 150,000 or so views. It went pretty viral. But one of the underlying comment across everyone was like, we have all these many vendors. I think probably maybe close to 900 or thereabout in different fragments. And it's like, we have all these logos and yet we haven't solved the problem. So to that point, I think number one, whoever will be successful going forward, we need to have a unified type of solution. Someone who's able to unify and think about some of these problems more holistically and giving organizations and enterprises a centralized solution to manage both the your IAM, your governance type issues, as well as NHIs or all of your privileges into one type of unified problem solution. I think the second piece, in terms of how I think about future generations of companies, will be more dynamic in nature. You need something that moves past just the static nature of what we've known in the identity world to something that's you still need the static components, but something that's a lot more dynamic, a lot more contextual. So this now involves not just, hey, we know who's logging in, we understand the nature of this identity, but hey, you know what? As we're spinning up new containers, as we're spinning up like new processes on the fly, we're creating like new types of NHIs, and now we're creating a new baseline for behavior, how users are behaving or how they access specific types of resources. Do you have an identity security provider that's able to keep up in time in terms of being contextually aware of user behavior, location, device health, and risk signals, and just be able to dynamically adapt? So I do think that's like one piece to it. I also think we'll talk about maybe AI later on, but how are we trying to automate this whole processes of setting up an account, user access profit, user access reviews. How are we going to make these processes less cumbersome and less complex? Um, yes, and then obviously, I think we have to also think a lot about NHIs, especially with agents and bots and increase of service accounts. I think whoever will be successful going forward, you need to think about the human identity side, but you also increasingly have to have solutions around dealing with non-human identity. So those are just a few things that I think about that a future solution needs, and eventually whoever's the platform needs to think about addressing this.
As venture investors, the way we've kind of taken an approach is, hard for startups to be the unifying platform. They typically have to focus in a particular area. And so our investment thesis has been, let's focus on innovation on the IGA bucket, that admin side. Let's focus separately on innovation on runtime. And our thesis to date, and it might be wrong, is that, PAM certainly made sense for legacy applications, but in kind of the modern app world, what is a privileged user, right? Everybody's a privileged user. And there are very, many gradations of privilege that you're going to want to have, based on the roles and the work that people are doing. And by the way, those are no longer static, right? Having privilege today doesn't mean I should have privilege tomorrow or even an hour from now. And so, our current thesis is this bucket of PAM potentially gets absorbed in this world of next gen IGA, next gen IAM, but also potentially that a new third bucket emerges, which is this area of identity protection. And the notion of protection, it's kind of analogous to, in the world of networking, you had infrastructure companies like Cisco. Well, you needed things to protect the infrastructure, like Palo Alto Networks, or you have endpoints built by Microsoft and Apple, and you had CrowdStrike protect that endpoint, and that you really have this distinction between infrastructure and protection around a couple vectors. One being infrastructure tends to be policy centric,
Right.
whereas things that protect the infrastructure have to really be protection centric. What are the bad guys doing? How can they do it versus policy? And to the second is, in infrastructure, you tend to be more selective in that these systems connect to other systems to create a policy with a specific system they connect to. when you're looking for what the bad folks are doing, you have to be holistic versus selective. You have to see everything to find the needle in the haystack. And so I'm curious within identity, how do you see identity protection versus identity infrastructure as evolving?
Yeah, I really like the statistics you guys do have, because that's really what's happening, even for my research and the professionals and operators I speak to as well. This is also what's beginning to resonate in terms of how companies are thinking about solving the identity problem. And to your point, I do think this world of how we go about actually protecting the hygiene of your identity systems and infrastructure, we're seeing this emerge into a new area called ISPM. It feels like this seems to be like the new terminology. Obviously, it's been surfaced gradually, but I would actually want to imagine that in 2025, we might hear more of that terminology, which is really focusing on the configuration and the hygiene of your identity systems. What are the policies that you have in place around permissions and access controls? How are those implemented? Are they aligned with best practices? Compliance is a big part of this world as well, in terms of like being able to make sure that are you compliant with specific types of new regulations and whatnot. And so this is like this new word, and it's also kind of encompassing what we've known as your IGA slash PAM slash IAM into this new area called potentially an ISPM. It's still a fluid terminology that's still evolving, but that focus is more, if you want to think about on the left, it's slightly more static. It's more the hygiene of your systems and policies. See, and then to your point, there is this new emerging area. By the way, I have a report coming out, so I think by the time this report is reduced, I will be having a report on this runtime side of things. So how we actually go about securing identities in runtime, your identity threat detection and response component, which is more about, how are we making sure? So you've set up your infrastructure, you've gotten your hygiene right of all your identity systems left, but then in write time or runtime, now we could still be susceptible to threats. We might have suspicious activities, unusual login attempts, or privilege abuse, or some type of lateral movement. Usually comes from if there is a loophole in your IAM type systems on those hygiene side. And so we need to have a system in place to go about identity protection. And that's where I do see this becoming a big part of the market. And it's actually why I have an exclusive report in this space that will be coming out. So to your point, yes, I think there's this evolving theme now in the market, distinguishing between ISPM, if you want to call it, and then ITDR and identity protection.
It's interesting on one hand, say, well, it creates kind of even more non-human identities. There's also even, kind of more complex things happening with, Anthropic's computer use
Yeah.
launch, where, okay, now I could have my laptop and I'm logged in as me, but I'm not typing on the keyboard. It's an AI kind of typing on my keyboard. So is that a human identity, a non-human identity? You have you now have hybrid identities, and so would love to hear your thoughts on kind of the most salient impact AI and agentic AI and the trends we're seeing in AI overall will have on this identity landscape.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one that's rapidly evolving. I think you could think about the impact, or at least this is really early in terms of how I'm trying to think about this. Is there are different way? I mean, there may be highly two ways you could actually think of AI actually having a role in terms of the identity ecosystem. One is analogous to what we know of, like um how do I call this? It's more like AI as identity. This could be effects that AI has as a byproduct or as a result of AI. And what do I mean by this? Let me explain what I mean specifically. Agentic processes, new bots, new systems being implemented and rolled out in the organization because of AI, as a result of AI. What that then creates is a whole bunch of new types of identities across the enterprise that need also access, again, about access, they need login, they need some type of verification process to go to your SaaS applications, to your most important secrets, to whatever your privileged types of systems. And now, or you have to maybe go to the drive or somewhere, and you have a whole bunch of these processes running as a result of AI, creating a sprawl in terms of the identities in the enterprise. And that's creating a challenge for both the identity vendors as well as practitioners to how we're actually, what are the systems in place? Do we have the right technologies in place to actually deal with this? And I think that's a separate type of a problem in and of itself. But then on the other hand, you also have a situation whereby we want to actually leverage AI to actually solve identity-based types of problems. This could be like how it, like coming back to the point around identity protection, but like now that we have, if we have really good visibility into all of our different identities across the organization, maybe we have some type of a data lake type infrastructure that's feeding and giving us one system source of truth. How do we make sure we're identifying new types of threats on the fly? How are we doing advanced type of behavioral anomaly detection, leveraging AI, or like being able to correlate disparate types of signals using new advances in technology, or even how are we using this to automate a lot of the life cycle management things that we need in identity. So I think those are interesting ways. I mean, I'm still formulating my thesis, but I think the fundamental one that it's a byproduct of AI, and then the other one being how we're actually using AI to improve some of our existing technologies and processes in identity. But I'm curious how you're thinking about it too. This is one that is actually it's moving fast, and I'm actually still formulating what my thesis looks like here.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we think about is this notion of, ultimately identity vendors and the different categories of identity vendors have all been human centric. And today we know that there are 20 to 50x more non-human identities than human identities. And a year from now it'll be 100x, and 5 years from now it'll be 1,000x. And so, in the future, the vast majority of my access requests will not be humans. And so all the things we think about, like, okay, we have a user access review process. Well, that's just not doable, when you have 1,000x more identities, and all of those are, non-human identities, again, the vast majority. And so I think that there's going to be an important opportunity to rethink each of these categories. And, if there is an ultimate platform, what that ultimate platform looks like, that will be potentially non-human centric as opposed to human centric. Today, NHI is kind of, the side product, and managing human identities is the core. And I think very quickly that could change through the sheer growth of non-human identities, especially driven by AI, agentic AI, and not just first party, what an enterprise might be building for themselves, but think about, like, okay, now all my third parties. Okay, I'm using Salesforce. Well, Salesforce Agentforce is going to have a bunch of their AIs, and Workday is going to have a bunch of the Workday AIs. To make them effective, they need access to sensitive information. And so this question of who's accessing what now just gets multiplied 1,000-fold. And it's all third parties that are doing this, that aren't humans anymore. And so I think that creates a lot of opportunity to rethink, the AI, I'm sorry, the identity infrastructure with that macro change.
Absolutely. And I do think it then leads to an ultimate question of, are your existing vendors in each of these categories, whether we're talking about your IGA or like you're thinking about your ITDR component, like we have key vendors in this market, are they well positioned to just add AI and obviously incorporate it into their existing products? Or do we need a new type of company that's able to help companies rethink leveraging how they actually go about solving this problems using it? Is there a new startup there who should be created as a result to solve this problem horizontally, or are the incumbents how easy would it be for them to just incorporate that into their product? I think that's still an open question that's still left to be seen.
Well, great. Francis, really thank you for your time. Great discussion. And we'll look forward to doing this again in the future.